Blood stained the imported marble of the Chicago Syndicate ballroom, but Leone Marchetti only had eyes for the woman in the crimson dress. She was supposed to be a pawn, a fake wife for a $20 million dinner. Then she whispered 3 words, and the most ruthless boss in the city turned to stone. The Chicago skyline was swallowed by a freezing autumn downpour, but inside the glass walls of the Marchetti Syndicate headquarters, the temperature was absolute 0. Leone Marchetti stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city he ruled with an iron fist. At 34, Leone was the undisputed king of the Midwestern underworld. He was a man of lethal precision, devoid of sentiment, and widely feared for his merciless tactics. But violence alone could not secure the $20 million transatlantic shipping route being brokered by the old-world Italian families. The old bosses valued tradition. They valued stability. They refused to hand control of the East Coast ports to a rogue bachelor. They wanted a family man, someone anchored, someone who projected the illusion of an honorable life. Trent Hollis knew this. As the head of the rival Hollis Commission, Trent had been aggressively lobbying the old bosses, painting Leone as a volatile lone wolf. Trent was a snake wrapped in custom silk, a man who built his empire on extortion and psychological warfare. He already had a wife, a pristine socialite, and he was using his picture-perfect marriage as a weapon to steal the $20 million deal. Leone needed a wife. Not a real one, but a convincing one. And he needed her by the end of the week for the final arbitration dinner in Manhattan. The heavy oak doors of Leone's office swung open. His underboss stepped in, ushering a woman into the cavernous room. Nadia Sacco did not look like she belonged in a Mafia stronghold. She lacked the polished, emaciated sharpness of the women who usually orbited men of Leone's status. Nadia was soft, with generous curves, full hips, and a face that was strikingly beautiful in its natural, unpainted state. She wore a simple beige trench coat over a sensible skirt, her dark hair pulled back into an untidy clip. But it was not her full figure that caught Leone's immediate attention. It was her eyes. They were dark, assessing, and completely devoid of the terror he was accustomed to seeing. Leone turned from the window, his imposing frame casting a long shadow. He had chosen Nadia meticulously. Her father, a degenerate gambler, had racked up a crippling debt of $300,000 to Trent Hollis. Trent was preparing to make an example of the Sacco family. Leone had swooped in and bought the debt, effectively purchasing Nadia's life. He knew she was an auditor for a commercial logistics firm, a woman who spent her days quietly analyzing supply chains and offshore accounts. She was smart, desperate, and, in Leone's estimation, moldable. "Sit," Leone commanded, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that left no room for argument. Nadia remained standing. She clutched her worn leather handbag tightly, but her chin tilted up. "I prefer to stand, Mr. Marchetti. I know why I am here. You bought my father's markers from the Hollis Commission. I am here to negotiate a repayment plan." Leone let out a harsh, brief sound that might have been a laugh. He stepped closer, towering over her. "You do not negotiate with me, Miss Sacco. You do not have the capital to repay a fraction of what your father owes. Trent Hollis was going to sell your organs to recoup his losses. I am offering you a much simpler transaction." Nadia held her ground, though Leone could see the faint tremor in her hands. "What do you want?" "I require a wife," Leone said flatly. "For the next 6 months, you will bear my name. You will live in my estate. You will accompany me to a dinner in New York this Friday, where you will smile, act devoted, and convince the old families that I am a stable, domesticated man. In exchange, your father's debt is forgiven, and he will be relocated somewhere Trent Hollis can never find him." Nadia stared at him, processing the sheer absurdity and danger of the proposal. She looked at the cold, beautiful monster before her. Leone Marchetti was notoriously lethal. Being bound to him, even in a fake marriage, was a death sentence in its own right. But as she analyzed the variables, her sharp mind calculated the odds. It was the only way to save her family. "I am not a socialite, Mr. Marchetti," Nadia said, her voice steadying. "Look at me. I do not fit the mold of a mob boss's trophy wife. The men at that dinner will see right through this. Trent Hollis will tear the illusion apart." Leone's gaze swept over her slowly, taking in the soft, lush curves of her body, the defiant set of her jaw. A strange, unfamiliar heat coiled in his chest. He was surrounded by superficial perfection all day. Nadia's grounded, tangible reality was intoxicating. "You let me worry about Hollis," Leone said softly, stepping so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. "You are exactly what I need, real, untouched by this world. And if you play your part, you will survive. Do we have a deal?" Nadia looked up into his dark, dangerous eyes. She drew a slow breath, centering herself. "Yes, we have a deal." The transition from civilian to Mafia bride was brutal and swift. Within 48 hours, Nadia was moved into Leone's heavily fortified estate on the outskirts of Chicago. She was given a massive suite, a security detail, and a new wardrobe. The true test of their arrangement came the afternoon before the flight to New York. Leone had flown in a renowned French stylist to prepare Nadia for the $20 million dinner. The dress was a crucial element of the deception. It had to project wealth, elegance, and utter devotion to the Marchetti name. Nadia stood on a velvet pedestal in the center of her new bedroom, suffocating in a corset she did not want. The stylist, a sharp-featured woman named Madame Valerius, was pacing around her with a tape measure, making disapproving clicking sounds with her tongue. "The waist must be taken in further," Madame Valerius muttered to her assistant. "The hips are too wide for this silk. We must compress her if she is to look respectable next to Mr. Marchetti. We cannot have him parading a bakery maid before the commission." Nadia flushed deeply, her gaze dropping to the floor. She had spent her life navigating a world that demanded women take up as little space as possible. She was proud of her body, but the venom in the stylist's voice struck a raw nerve. She wrapped her arms around her midsection, wishing she could disappear. The heavy bedroom door clicked open. Leone walked in, wearing a charcoal three-piece suit, his presence immediately sucking all the oxygen from the room. He stopped near the doorway, his dark eyes locking on to Nadia. She was wearing a partially pinned, deep emerald gown that clung to every curve. To Leone, she looked like a goddess carved from marble and velvet, a vision of warmth and vitality that made his chest ache with a sudden, violent possessiveness. Then he noticed her posture, the defensive folding of her arms, the humiliation painting her cheeks red. Leone's gaze snapped to the stylist. "What is the problem here?" Madame Valerius offered a tight, condescending smile. "No problem, Mr. Marchetti. We are simply trying to tailor the silk to accommodate Miss Sacco's proportions. It requires some aggressive corsetry to achieve the standard silhouette." The temperature in the room plummeted. Leone walked slowly toward the pedestal. The two assistants instinctively backed away, terrified by the cold murder radiating from his eyes. "Get out," Leone said. Madame Valerius blinked, confused. "Sir, the fitting is not complete. If you or your assistants are not out of my house in 10 seconds, you will never leave it," Leone warned, his voice a lethal whisper. And if I ever hear you speak of my wife's body with anything less than absolute reverence, I will cut out your tongue." The stylist turned pale as chalk. She dropped her pins and scrambled out the door, her assistants fleeing right behind her. Silence descended on the room. Nadia stood frozen on the pedestal, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked down at Leon, expecting him to express frustration over the ruined fitting. Instead, he stepped up onto the pedestal with her. Gently, with hands that had ended lives, he reached out and brushed a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear. "Never fold yourself away," Leon commanded, his tone rough but intensely quiet. "Not for them. Not for anyone. You are a Marchetti now. You take up all the space you want." He stepped behind her, his large hands resting on her bare shoulders, his thumbs tracing the line of her collarbone. Then he slowly began to unlace the suffocating corset Madame Valerius had forced upon her. With every loosened thread, Nadia could breathe a little deeper. The emerald silk settled naturally against her lush curves, fitting her perfectly, comfortably, beautifully. Leon met her gaze in the full-length mirror. His dark eyes burned with an obsession he had not anticipated. He had hired a fake wife, but as he looked at her standing proud and breathtaking in the emerald gown, the line between deception and reality began to blur dangerously. "You look perfect," he murmured, pressing a fleeting, burning kiss to her bare shoulder. "Now let us go take $20 million from Trent Hollis." Hours later, the private jet touched down in New York. The rain of Chicago was replaced by the glittering, unforgiving lights of Manhattan. A motorcade of black armored SUVs transported them to the Onyx Room, an exclusive subterranean fortress disguised as a Michelin-starred restaurant. This was neutral ground. The entire restaurant had been bought out by the 5 old-world families presiding over the port deal. Leon offered Nadia his arm as they descended the marble staircase into the dimly lit, opulent dining room. "Stay close to me," he instructed quietly. "Do not speak to Hollis unless he speaks to you, and even then, give him nothing. He will look for a crack in our foundation." Nadia nodded, wrapping her hand around his muscular bicep. She could feel the heavy, reassuring weight of the concealed firearm beneath his suit jacket. They entered the main hall. A massive mahogany table sat in the center, surrounded by men smoking cigars and sipping rare cognac. The air was thick with tension and the smell of danger. At the head of the table sat the old bosses, their ancient, weathered faces giving away nothing. And leaning against the far wall, swirling a glass of whiskey, was Trent Hollis. Trent was lean, blonde, and possessed a shark-like smile that never reached his pale blue eyes. The moment Leon and Nadia walked in, Trent's gaze locked onto them. A predatory smirk spread across his face as he pushed off the wall and sauntered over. "Leon," Trent purred, extending a hand that Leon ignored. "I must admit, I was shocked to hear you tied the knot, and so quickly, it almost feels desperate." Trent's pale eyes slid to Nadia. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering with deliberate disrespect. "And this must be the lovely bride. Nadia, isn't it? Nadia Sacco." Nadia's blood ran cold. Trent knew her real name. He knew her father. He was testing her, waiting for her to break character, to show fear, to reveal the entire marriage was a sham born of blackmail. Leon shifted slightly, stepping half an inch in front of Nadia, a silent, deadly barrier. "Address my wife with respect, Trent, or I will break your jaw before the first course is served." Trent chuckled, holding his hands up in mock surrender. "No disrespect intended. I just find it fascinating. A woman like her, With a man like you, it is quite the fairy tale. He leaned in closer to Nadia, lowering his voice. Tell me, Mrs. Marchetti, does your husband know about the little auditing discrepancies at your old logistics firm, the ones that point to federal tax evasion? It was a blind strike. Trent was guessing, trying to rattle her with the threat of federal exposure. But Nadia was an auditor. She knew numbers, and she had spent the last 2 days on the estate reading every file Leone had on the Hollis Commission. She possessed a photographic memory, and her mind was a steel trap. She felt Leone tense beside her, preparing to unleash violence. Nadia squeezed Leone's arm gently, anchoring him. She met Trent's pale, predatory eyes and offered a sweet, terrifyingly calm smile. "I am afraid you are mistaken, Mr. Hollis," Nadia said, her voice smooth and echoing slightly in the quiet room. "I do not know anything about tax evasion, but I do know that routing your offshore shell company funds through the Cayman bank accounts under your mother's maiden name leaves a very messy digital footprint, especially the $3 million you skimmed from the Commission's general fund last quarter. I imagine the gentlemen at this table would be very interested in reviewing those ledgers." Trent's smirk vanished. The color drained from his face, leaving him ashen. He stared at her, genuinely horrified. Leone stared at her too. He had known she was smart, but he had not realized she had spent her idle time at his estate memorizing the financial weaknesses of his greatest enemy. In that singular moment, Leone did not just see a fake wife or a pawn. He saw a queen. His queen. Nadia looked up at Leone, her dark eyes shining with quiet, unyielding strength. The game had truly begun, and the stakes were higher than blood. As the old bosses summoned them to the table, Leone placed his hand firmly on the small of Nadia's back. He would kill anyone who tried to take her from him. The $20 million deal was no longer the prize. She was, and the night was only just beginning. The mahogany table in the center of the onyx room was a battleground disguised as a banquet. 5 of the most powerful men on the eastern seaboard sat around it, their eyes sharp, their expressions unreadable. At the head of the table was Don Vincenzo Costa, the aging patriarch of the Brooklyn Syndicate. Vincenzo was a man who respected the old ways, a ruthless traditionalist who held the deciding vote over the $20 million shipping route. Leone sat to Vincenzo's right, projecting an aura of relaxed lethality. Nadia was seated beside him, her posture flawless. The emerald silk gown draped elegantly over her curves, and she kept her hands folded neatly in her lap. Across the table, Trent Hollis was unraveling. The revelation Nadia had dropped in the main hall was eating away at his composure. Trent's usual arrogant smirk had been replaced by a tight, frantic grimace. The first 3 courses of the dinner passed with polite, tense conversation. They discussed the docks, the unions, and the rising tariffs in Europe. Throughout it all, Vincenzo Costa watched Leone and Nadia with calculating eyes. As the waiters cleared the plates for the main course, Vincenzo finally addressed the elephant in the room. "Leone," Vincenzo began, his raspy voice commanding instant silence. "You have always been a capable earner for our shared interests. But this transatlantic route requires a man with roots, a family man. You bring this lovely woman before us tonight, yet rumors persist that your union is nothing more than a strategic fiction." Trent leaned forward, seizing the opportunity. "It is a sham, Don Vincenzo. He bought her father's gambling debts. She is a civilian, a hostage playing dress-up. She knows nothing of our world, and she certainly does not have the stomach to stand beside a boss when the federal agents start knocking." Leone did not blink. He reached under the table, his large hand wrapping around Nadia's thigh, a grounding, territorial touch that sent a jolt of heat straight through her chest. "Trent is projecting his own insecurities," Leone said calmly. "My wife is more capable than any man sitting at this table." Vincenzo turned his piercing gaze to Nadia. "Is that so, Mrs. Marchetti? Tell me, if you were managing the East Coast ports, how would you handle the newly implemented customs inspections at the Baltimore terminal? It is bleeding our profits dry," Trent sneered. It was a highly technical, logistical nightmare. There was no way a supposed trophy wife would know the answer. Nadia took a slow sip of her water. She placed the crystal glass down and looked directly into Vincenzo's eyes. She did not shrink. She did not waver. She did. "The Baltimore terminal is a distraction, Don Vincenzo," Nadia said, her voice clear and authoritative. "The customs agents are focusing on container weights, flagging anything that deviates by more than 5%. Instead of bribing the inspectors, which increases our risk footprint, we should reroute the high-value cargo through the Philadelphia Maritime Exchange." The room went dead silent. Even Leone looked at her, his pulse quickening with a mixture of pride and dark fascination. Nadia continued, her analytical mind operating at peak efficiency. "Philadelphia's Port Authority recently upgraded their automated tracking software. By exploiting a backdoor in their digital manifest registry, we can misclassify the weight tiers before the ships even dock. The cargo bypasses the physical inspection lines entirely. It reduces bribery costs by 60% and completely eliminates the bottleneck at Baltimore. The $20 million route becomes a $30 million route within a fiscal year." Vincenzo stared at her for a long, heavy moment. Then a slow, genuine smile spread across his weathered face. He began to clap, the sound echoing sharply in the subterranean room. "Brilliant," Vincenzo declared. "Absolutely brilliant." He shot a disgusted look at Trent. "You brought me rumors and whining, Hollis. Leone brought me a queen who understands the future of our business." Trent's face turned purple with rage. "Vincenzo, you cannot be serious. She is an auditor. She is bluffing." "Shut your mouth, Trent," Vincenzo snapped, his tone turning instantly lethal. "The decision is made. The route belongs to the Marchetti Syndicate. And if I hear you speak another word of disrespect toward this woman, I will have your tongue served on a silver platter." Leone squeezed Nadia's thigh, his thumb brushing against the silk of her dress. He leaned in, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. "You are magnificent," he murmured, his breath hot against her skin. Nadia shivered, realizing with terrifying clarity that she was no longer acting. The adrenaline, the power, the undeniable magnetism of the dangerous man sitting beside her. It was all becoming dangerously real. The celebration was short-lived. By the time Leone and Nadia exited the Onyx Room, the Manhattan skies had opened up, unleashing a torrential downpour. The neon lights of the city bled into the wet asphalt. Leone's armored SUV was parked in a private, poorly lit loading alley behind the restaurant. As they approached, Leone's instincts flared. The alley was entirely too quiet. His driver, who should have been standing by the open door, was nowhere to be seen. "Stop!" Leone commanded, pushing Nadia slightly behind him. He reached inside his jacket, his hand gripping the cold steel of his firearm. Before he could draw, a spotlight clicked on, blinding them. From the shadows of the loading dock, 3 armed men stepped forward. At their center was Trent Hollis, his blonde hair plastered to his forehead by the rain, a silver Glock trembling in his hand. Trent had lost the port deal. He had lost the respect of the commission. He was a dead man walking, and he had nothing left to lose. "Hands away from your jacket, Leone!" Trent screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Do it, or my men will turn you both into Swiss cheese." Leone slowly withdrew his empty hand, calculating the angles. 3 shooters. Trent was agitated. The odds of drawing his weapon and neutralizing all 4 before they fired were 0. His primary concern, his only concern, was Nadia. "This is over, Trent," Leone said, his voice a low, steady rumble cutting through the sound of the rain. "Vincenzo gave me the ports. If you pull that trigger, the old families will hunt down every relative you have ever loved." "I do not care about the families," Trent spat. He lunged forward with terrifying speed, grabbing Nadia by the arm and ripping her away from Leone. Nadia gasped as Trent violently yanked her against his chest, wrapping a forearm around her throat and pressing the barrel of the Glock directly against her temple. The cold metal bit into her skin. "Nadia!" Leone roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror tearing from his throat. He drew his weapon in a blur of motion, aiming squarely at Trent. "Drop it!" Trent shrieked, hiding his body entirely behind Nadia's soft, curved frame. "Drop the gun, Leone, or I blow her brains all over this alley. Sign the port rights over to me right now. Call Vincenzo. Do it." Rain poured down Leone's face. His heart hammered against his ribs like a battering ram. For the first time in his ruthless, blood-soaked life, Leone Marchetti felt paralyzing fear. He had built his empire on violence, on calculated sacrifices, on viewing people as disposable assets. But as he looked at Nadia, held hostage in the freezing rain, he realized she was not an asset. She was his heart. She was the woman who had stood up to him, who had outsmarted the Commission, who had taken up space in his cold, empty world and made it warm. He could not lose her. He would burn the entire world to ash before he let her die. Leone kept his gun raised, his hand shaking slightly for the first time in his career. Trent was completely shielded. There was no clean shot. Nadia struggled to breathe against Trent's chokehold. The rain soaked her emerald dress, but her mind remained razor-sharp. She looked at Leone. She saw the devastation in his dark eyes, the realization that he was trapped. She knew he would surrender his empire, his life, to save her. But Nadia Sacco was a survivor. She refused to be a pawn in Trent Hollis's pathetic downfall. Nadia locked eyes with Leone. She stopped struggling. She went completely limp in Trent's arms, making herself dead weight. Trent stumbled backward slightly to maintain his balance, his grip loosening just a fraction of an inch to compensate for her sudden shift. In that split second, Nadia looked deep into Leone's terrified soul and whispered 3 words. "Shoot through me!" Leone froze. The words hit him like a physical blow to the chest. The most ruthless boss in Chicago turned to stone. The world stopped spinning. The rain hung suspended in the air. She was offering her life for his. She was asking him to put a bullet through her own shoulder to reach the monster hiding behind her. It was the ultimate act of trust, the ultimate sacrifice, and Leone absolutely refused to accept it. Instead of firing, Leone did the one thing Trent never expected. He dropped his gun. The heavy weapon clattered loudly against the wet pavement. Trent let out a bark of triumphant laughter, his focus completely consumed by Leone's surrender. "Smart boy," Trent mocked. But Trent had underestimated the woman in his arms. With Leone disarmed and Trent distracted, Nadia seized her moment. Using her solid weight and leverage, she threw her head backward, smashing her skull directly into the bridge of Trent's nose. Cartilage crunched. Trent screamed in agony, his grip on her throat breaking as his hands flew to his shattered, bloody face. Nadia dropped to the wet pavement. Leone moved with the speed of a striking viper. He closed the distance in a fraction of a second. He did not bother picking up his gun. He grabbed the wrist of Trent's gun hand, twisting it violently until the bone snapped and the Glock hit the floor. With his other hand, Leone drove a devastating, skull-cracking punch into Trent's jaw, sending the rival boss crashing into the brick wall of the alley. Trent's men finally raised their weapons, but a sudden hail of gunfire erupted from the street. Leone's heavily armed backup had arrived, cutting down Trent's gunmen in seconds. The alley fell silent, save for the pouring rain and Trent's pathetic groans as he lay broken in the mud. Leone did not spare his enemy a second glance. He dropped to his knees on the soaked asphalt, pulling Nadia fiercely into his arms. He crushed her against his chest, burying his face in her wet, dark hair. He was shaking. The king of the underworld was trembling like a leaf. "You idiot!" Leone breathed roughly, his hands frantically checking her body for injuries. "You beautiful, brilliant idiot. Never say that to me again. Do you understand? I would never hurt you. I would let the whole city burn before I let a single bullet touch you." Nadia wrapped her arms around his broad shoulders, clinging to him in the cold rain. Her heart was racing, but she felt incredibly, perfectly safe. "I knew you wouldn't do it," she whispered against his neck. "I knew it would distract him. We make a good team, Mr. Marchetti." Leone pulled back just enough to frame her face with his large hands. The possessiveness in his dark eyes was absolute and terrifyingly beautiful. The fake marriage was dead. The arrangement was over. "You are not a fake wife," Leone vowed, his voice a fierce, unyielding promise against the storm. "You are my real wife. Today, tomorrow, and until the day I die. You are mine." Nadia looked at the ruthless Mafia boss who had bought her life and realized he had given her his soul in return. She smiled, brushing the wet hair from his forehead. "Then take me home, husband," Nadia said softly. Leone stood, lifting her effortlessly into his arms, carrying his queen out of the darkness and into the empire they would rule together. Wow, what a heart-stopping finale. Did you expect Nadia to make such a bold move, or were you just as shocked as Leone? If this gripping Mafia romance kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button and share this story with your friends. Leave a comment down below telling us your favorite moment between Leone and Nadia, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling underworld romance stories. See you next time.